Hello, my name is Raphael, and this is my case study, which is about Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff was a man that was responsible for fraud to the tune of $65 billion. And today I'm going to break down what happened, and this is what my presentation is about. So, first, we need to look at some background info so you guys understand. Um, the guy himself, Bernie Madoff, was the head of an investment firm which he made in the 60s. And what set him apart in this investment firm was that he used electronic trading, which at the time was something like groundbreaking. So that made him successful. And at one point, he was responsible for, or his firm rather, was responsible for handling 5 to 10% of all the trades in New York. And since New York has Wall Street in it, this is a lot of trades. And when the NASDAQ was formed, which NASDAQ is one of the exchanges some of you guys are probably familiar with, he actually became the chairman, one of the chairmen of the NASDAQ. Now we can take a look at the scan itself and what happened. So it began with some suspicions. His firm would generate 1 to 2% monthly returns. And this one portfolio manager named Harry Markopoulos, he was jealous, or rather looking to replicate the success because Bernie Madoff kept taking his customers away from him. So when he went to try to replicate what the firm was doing, what Madoff's firm was doing, he found that he couldn't. And so this made him suspicious, and he saw that the 1 to 2% monthly returns were incredibly consistent to the point where even when the market was down, he would just continue having the same returns over and over, which is obviously weird. And these suspicions led him to believe that it was either a case of insider trading, that Bernie had some knowledge, which is why he was able to do this, or a Ponzi scheme. Now, many of you guys are probably familiar with what a Ponzi scheme is, but how a Ponzi scheme works in investing is that somebody convinces an investor to give them their money for a return, and normally these returns would be paid off with what the person that convinced the investor, they would invest in something and pay off the returns like that. However, in a Ponzi scheme, the return is actually paid off with the initial money that was given. So there is actually no return, and the person is actually losing money. Well, they're getting their own money back under the impression that they're making more money. Then, if the person who is committing the Ponzi scheme is able to convince more people to join, eventually these investors end up paying for the first investors their returns, as you can see here by this graph. Like, it starts off small and then it gets bigger. Because of this, as more people start to join and they believe that they're getting these really consistent returns, they spread the word, and it becomes more and more seemingly profitable to invest in this. And then it continues. More and more people invest their money, meaning that the person that started the Ponzi scheme is able to pay off the initial people more and more. And on top of that, they get to take a pretty decent amount depending on how many people they have for themselves. This was especially successful for Bernie since his firm was like all about consistency. So the people that were investing in it were looking for like long-term investments, meaning they weren't gonna need their money back anytime soon. They're just leaving it there to get that 1 to 2% every month. So when Mr. Markopoulos kept looking into it, he found that there were clues that led him to believe that there was a Ponzi scheme taking place. He saw that there were no records of transactions of exchanges between his firm and the exchanges. There were no trades, And when he went to take it to the SEC, however, he found that he had no hard evidence for what was happening. So the SEC didn't really take him seriously at first. But as he kept investigating, he found that there were even more flags, which he brought to the SEC's attention. The SEC is the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is responsible for handling like financial crimes and stuff like that. But the SEC eventually opened an investigation into Bernie Madoff and his firm. However, they eventually closed the investigation because Bernie Madoff was able to avoid their detection. What finally ended up doing him in was actually the 2008 financial recession, which is a topic that another classmate will probably cover. But basically, because everything was going down the way it did, every investor wanted to sell. They were understandably panicked by what was happening, and they wanted their money immediately. So every investor wanted out, which means that Bernie had to somehow pay them off with money that he didn't have, because he had been using it to pay off others and for himself, which eventually led him to surrender and turn himself in. Now, the fallout of what happened, obviously, the $65 billion that were wiped, or more accurately, were never there. And this is actually $65 billion. This is larger than Croatia's GDP, which astonished me. And these are things like people's holdings, people's pensions, their savings. And obviously, people lost these things, which impacts them greatly. I mean, if you think about a retiree who is looking forward to, or somebody looking forward to their retirement and putting in money for their pension, just for that to get wiped out all of a sudden, that's obviously gonna impact very greatly. Another impact was that many charities and other organizations were forced to close because they had all their money in Bernie's firm. And one of the most unfortunate and direct results was that one of the sons of Bernie Madoff actually committed suicide because of the fallout. And obviously, him being related to Bernie was not helping things. And on a more grand scale, this caused like a large impact on people's trust in financial institutions in general, especially with regards to the fact that it happened on top of the 2008 financial recession. Now we look at what happened and kind of how it happened. Now we can take a look at why it happened. So starting off with why Bernie did it, this is a little more unclear because obviously we can't take a look at his mind, and since he was the one who committed the crime, he's not gonna say like because I'm greedy or anything like that. But I mean, that's most likely what it is. He was chasing notoriety, like being known as the guy in Wall Street, and riches as well. Like the money that he made is nothing to laugh at. And one thing that he did say, however, is that he felt like he started off with something small, like something that looked or seemed at the time inconsequential, almost like a white lie. And then eventually, like a Ponzi scheme does, you have to keep lying and keep ripping people off to keep the thing going. And at some point, he just had too much to lose with what would happen if he turned or if he was found out and stopped, and too much to gain as well. Like if he stopped, he wouldn't be able to gain all the money and reputation that he did, which was addicting. And I put this image of a devil going down a slippery slope, which kind of illustrates what this is. And as for why other people allowed it, or why it was allowed to happen, mostly one of the main factors actually is power and influence. As we know time and time again, it's really hard to speak out or question somebody that has a lot of power and influence because, well, it just seems like it's the wrong thing to do. You can see this in any case where there's some sort of figure in power that is doing something wrong. And as it turns out, according to Harry Markopoulos, there was actually hundreds of people that had the same suspicions as him. But they chose not to investigate and look into it further or question further because, as he put it, people in glass houses don't throw stones. What this means to me is that the whole environment is just full of this, like, corruption and stuff like that. And another quote that comes to mind is like, "Don't poke the hornet's nest," or something like that, meaning that these people didn't want to bring stuff up because they were afraid of what might come to expose them from it. And also, Bernie Madoff had a lot of SEC connections, and actually sometimes they would ask him for advice on certain things, which means that he was probably able to, like, get warnings when they would come investigate, and he was able to falsify documents. And there's actually a story about some people that worked with him who reported that they would put falsified documents in the fridge to avoid the investigators knowing that they had just been freshly printed. So that's kind of how it happened. Now, as for some solutions and ways that things like this could be prevented from happening again. Well, for one, the major one and the only one I can think of is regulations. Because although changing mindsets is probably the best solution, it's impossible to enforce that. And some people always have a different mindset based on different factors of their lives and so on. So the best thing to do is to try to prevent things, which after this happened, the SEC focused on doing, try to prevent it from happening again. And they did things like restructuring, meaning what this entailed was enhancing their fraud detection training and other things to be able to detect fraud more easily. They also went to improve their procedures involving fraud like this. And they also changed the way that they handled tips and whistleblowing, because obviously the way that they handled Mr. Markopoulos' tips was not great. At first they didn't believe him and so on. And also there were regulations that they enacted after this. Primarily the requirement for funds to have a third party in custody of the assets, meaning that somebody else other than the fund itself would hold on to the money so that Ponzi scheme would be basically impossible. And then other things in general that could prevent this from happening is whistleblowing. Like, obviously the main way that this was, that the first person to find out was Harry Markopoulos, and he was able to blow the whistle. So encouraging more people to do that, and encouraging, listening to them and enacting regulations and stuff like that to prevent people from retaliating against whistleblowers. And as well as the questioning authority, which I think is really important, especially since you hear so many times that somebody seems like they have so much authority to the point where nobody wants to question them. I think it's important that we foster and remember to question authority, because it might sound wrong in and of itself, but there's nothing wrong with just questioning as long as it's not mean-spirited out of the get-go. There's nothing wrong with wanting answers for things. But yeah, that was basically what happened and my case study. For listening.